Hi everyone, welcome to Poetry and Talk. Poetry and Talk is a new online interviewing platform for poets to share their poetry, background, and inspiration. We're so grateful that you've checked in with us today. We have a lot of new poets to introduce you to these next couple of months, so that we hope you'll stick around with us. You can stay connected with us on our Facebook page, Poetry and Talk, and check out some new poet interviews and also the ones that we've uploaded. We hope you've had a chance to be inspired by them, and please stay connected and share and like as well. I'm Leslie Sue, the host for Poetry and Talk, and we have a new guest poet today to introduce you to, and her name is Deborah Williams. Hi, Deborah, how are you?
I'm good, Leslie Sue. So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, we're so great. We're so grateful to have you here and grateful to find out all about you. If you're all set, we'd love to hear a little bit of a brief introduction to a poem and then have you read that.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. I live in Melbourne, Australia, and like the rest of the world, we've been battling COVID. We've been in lockdown for 111 days, severe lockdown, but it has meant that we have now gone 12 days free with no COVID cases. So I wrote this poem yesterday. I'm what you'd call an accessible poet. You'll all understand my poetry. And I like to write about things that are going on in the world and people that I know. But this is what I wrote in response to the COVID situation we've got here. This poem is called We're Out, Let's Give a Shout. We're out, no more relying on the phone. Now we can stand near people and sigh as they moan about the government, their neighbour, a friend who flouts the rules, the maskless mob, the demonstrators, the media who uses their tools to incite fear and rage, to rattle our cage. We're out, let's give a shout to those who never stayed in, the checkout chicks, the doctors and nurses, the delivery guys who always came in, the police who walked the streets, our army lending a hand. Many risked infection while they tried to protect our land. We're out, let's give a shout to those that didn't make it. 907 souls lost. Their loved ones grieve. That was not the way for them to leave. Alone they cry for those who died. We're out. I can no longer shout. My heart is full and sad. This pandemic shined a light on all that is good and bad.
That's beautiful,
So
Deborah.
Thank you, Leslie Sue. I was challenged to think about that word out, that for so long, for 111 days, all people talked about was when we'd be allowed out, because we had a curfew of 7 o'clock at night. We weren't allowed to go any more than 5 kilometres or 2 miles from home, and the only shops that were open were food and medicine. So, you know, we were severely locked down, but, you know, there were lots of people who still had to go out, doctors and nurses, and I just wanted to pay tribute to them.
Oh, that's so beautiful. So I'm kind of getting the feeling it's like a freedom song, because it's now 111 days that you're actually out of lockdown, but it's also reflections of all that you've experienced during this time and different, you know, things that have gone on with the COVID, you know, people transitioning, you know, people that are still working, people that are staying in the home. It's kind of like, you know, surveying this whole, you know, situation, you know, from your perspective.
Yes. And I think sometimes when we express poetry about what's going on around us, it helps us deal with it. It helps us put it into some sort of perspective. It helps us with our own feelings of how we're coping, because now that we are out, so to speak, I don't really want to go out. Maybe that's a poet's life. Maybe that's being a bit of an introvert and having more time to write. I'm not sure, but certainly there was a lot of people who moaned and groaned and did all that. But it was for the better good of everyone, and we helped save lives. So yeah. So I just so that was my first poem, to just sort of let you know that the poetry that I write, as I said, you will understand I'm an accessible poet, and I was described once as a confessional poet. So, but the way I began poetry or writing was 20 years ago. I used to play a lot of sports and I had bad knees. And when the third specialist said, stop playing sport, find something else to do, I took up writing because I'd always loved English as a child and as a teenager. And I went to like a local neighbourhood house and started writing, and then found out I could do a diploma in creative writing. And part of that was a friend talked me into doing the poetry component, which I didn't really want to do. I was reluctant. I didn't remember that I loved poetry. I loved English, but I didn't remember that. And yet, funnily enough, it was the only textbook I kept from high school, was my poetry book. So there was a message there. So I started my diploma, and the poetry teacher that very first day asked all of us why we were there. Why are you in this class? And I said, I'm here because my friend said you should come in this class, and I'm not really a poet and I'm not really interested in poetry. And he laughed at me and he just said, well, you know what? You're just going to be a delight to teach. And I look forward to where this goes. So that week we had to pick one thing to write about and bring it to the class the next Friday. And that week my mother-in-law went into hospital. And this just came to me while I was sitting in the hospital. And so I will share this small poem with you. Her name was Mabel, and it's just called Mabel. Dry red eyes stare into space. Where is her mind? It's no place. She sits perfectly still, so wrinkled, so old, not from lack of want, her body cold. She cares not for the nurses rushing to and fro. She concentrates only on her mantra. Please God, let me go. So I read that out. That was my first poem that I read out in the class. And you could have heard a pin drop. And there was this dead silence. And all I could think of in that moment was, oh my God, I'm really bad. And the teacher, he just let there be the silence. And then he just said, so Deborah, I want you to look around at all the faces in the room and tell me what you see. And I saw that people were moved. Mm-hmm. And then people started saying about their grandmother or their father, or that they'd been there. They'd been at a hospital bed where someone was in so much pain that they just wanted to go. And he just pulled me aside at the end of the class and he said, you're a confessional poet. And he said, I'm telling you that now after one poem, because he said, you've already worked out what your strength is. So he said, explore with curiosity all the other forms of poetry or what you might like to do. But he said, write from your heart, because that's your message. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I've done for the last 20 years. And he was right. He was right. I did explore lots of other poetry. You know, like if someone asked me to write about a spring day or a summer day, or there has to be a story there for me. I can't just write description, I guess. And so I've let that be my guidepost ever since.
Mm-hmm. What an amazing story that, first of all, you had a friend that really kind of prompted you and kind of pushed you, in this direction, and that you went ahead with that. And then you had this professor, this teacher, who really kind of locked into you and encouraged you, and also kind of gave you some interesting insight into you, and a little bit of a, kind of opening a potential trajectory for you, kind of, he was seeing, some, potential, ride that poetry would take you on. So that's quite fortunate, and really quite a beautiful way to start your poetic journey.
It was because then I found that I just had such a great source of subjects to write about. If I just concentrated on writing from the heart and what I wanted, my message to get out there, well, then it was quite easy. My second poem, so just to give a brief outline, my marriage broke up when I was in my early 30s. I met my husband at 16, fell madly in love, and got married and had 2 children, and it was sort of all over by my early 30s. And I'm very, very lucky that I met a lovely man, second man. He had 2 children, I had 2 children, and we brought the families together. So I had a wealth of things to write about. And my second poem that I'd like to share with you, if that's okay,
Yes.
is called Separation. And when I wrote this, during those first few weeks, and Bruce London was a professor actually. He actually said to me, what you need to do now is perform this. And so he booked a little cafe, and we all went as a class, and we all had to stand up and we had to perform our poetry. And you could hear the coffee machine, and there were other people in there. There were other patrons. And he'd heard this poem, and when it was my turn to stand up, he actually made me go out the front. And I'm so grateful that he did that very early on, because it held me in good stead. And I thought, if I could have done that, I can do anything. So this is called Separation. And for any of those that have gone through a separation, I'm sure this will resonate. Separation. He walked away, and I was thrust into a new and frightening world. My fairy tale marriage over, destroyed in just 2 words. Prying glances, furtive whispers, my life split apart. Single mother, separation, divorce. These words break my heart. He walked away, he wants to be free. My dreams are left undone. I weep red tears for the loss of the only man I've loved. Fate deals me a different deck. My eyes are opened wide to the prejudices of society, who are quick to criticise. He walked away. It's true. No one's fault, says the law. Society has a different view. We're labelled forevermore. The stigma is unrelenting. What right have they to say? Who is the normal family in this crazy world today? He walked away. I couldn't stop him, but my children are not alone. I fight what society brands them, statistics from a broken home. I was lucky enough that when I finished reading that, I was the only one to get applause. And I realised that probably half those people in that cafe either had grandchildren who were part of a divorce, or children. And that was when I really thought, I want to keep writing poetry that moves people. That became my thing, and that's sort of what I've tried to do.
Mm-hmm. You're a great storyteller, and you have a beautiful flow, and it's very colorful in the way that you express yourself, and you kind of take us with you, like on this journey, just with the 3 poems that you've read. So that's quite an interesting, skill that you have with that.
No, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you a few questions. So based on these 3 poems, these are specifically things that you went through, very transitional periods in your life. And the first ones were initially during your, kind of beginning, your origins of your poetry. So just one thing led to another, and then you wrote about some things going on in your life. Did you find out through the process of poetry that it was kind of healing, that it was kind of helping you organize and assess your thoughts? Or did you kind of have like a premonition about it? Or how did this whole process kind of unfold to direct you in the subject matter that you like to write about?
I think, first of all, I found poetry extremely healing, and I would urge anyone to go to the hard places. If you're a poet out there and there are deep things that you want to write about, go there. It is healing, and I suppose it depends on if you want to just write for yourself, that's fine. But if you want to write and I suppose you can't heal other people, but other people resonate with what you say, to me, that's a healing. To me, that's not just sharing your words, that's a recognition. That's people saying, yes, I've felt that too. I know what that means. As I went on with the diploma, I went and did the poetry 2. There was poetry A and poetry B. And of course, that was a much harder subject, and we had to put a lot more poems together. And what resulted in that was that I did a zine, first of all. And at the end of the diploma, together with 2 friends, we self-published a poetry book called Threesome, meaning the 3 of us poets, but also mother, father and son, family tree. So a lot of these poems are family related, and we did a print run, and we had a book launch, and we sold out that night, which was fantastic. But what was really fantastic for me was that I wrote this poem called Divorce. It's a very short poem. And I got 3 emails regarding this one little poem. And, most poets, as we know, don't get much feedback, certainly not feedback from strangers. So to get an email from someone to say, I read your poem and you're so right, that's just how I feel. So I'll just read this, as I said, it's 6 lines. Divorce. Divorce is as a pebble dropped in a pond. Innocent ripples, so pretty and peaceful, hide an internal earthquake, immeasurable on the Richter scale. The aftershock goes on and on and on. And that is what divorce is like. You kind of think, once the divorce is over, it all ends, but that isn't true. And I think anyone who's been through it really understands that. And those 3 strangers who wrote to me poured out their hearts. And, I said, write about it. It's great you've written to me. I'm touched that you feel that way. But here you've written to me. That's just the start of your healing. And I think poetry can really be used in that way. I think it's an underused resource.
That's beautifully said. Yes, yes, I agree. I'm curious, Deborah, for these past 111 days, did you involve yourself in some other poetry, and did it relate to the COVID, or did you explore some other subjects? How has the past 111 days for you been?
So what I did in the last 111 days, I did write poetry. I did write a lot of poetry. But what I did mainly was I printed out all my poems that I've written with the thought now that I will put them together in a book. Self-publishing your own poetry is very easy to do these days, not like in the old days. My husband's an artist, so we're thinking we might, we're just doing this for our family, just, you know, just for us. But it was really, really lovely to go back and read my poems. And it was lovely to have a marker, if you like, on different things that happened to me during the poetry journey. I mean, from the book, from writing the book, so much happened, so much happened. I was asked to facilitate a poetry group. That was the first thing that happened. And that was just delightful. That was, you know, I did it for 5 years. And I've just reconnected with those poets lately online. And so we meet online. We got interviewed on the radio. We approached a local cafe and we started a poetry group. And so what happened then is, because every month we'd meet and we never knew whether there was going to be 6 people or 12 people or 15 people, the 3 of us would write a lot of poems because we were performing them. We encouraged everyone else to perform, but if only 6 people came, you know, we sort of filled the gap. So I've written a lot of poetry over the years. And when I was printing out my poetry, I found this poem that I wrote a couple of poems. I had a throat nodule cut out. I had a nodule on my vocal cords, and I wasn't allowed to speak for 6 days. And anyone in my family would tell you that was really, really a most difficult thing for me to do, not to talk for 6 days. But what ended up happening was I had this rush of poetry because it was all in my head and I just had to get it down. And I found this poem that I wrote during my recovery, and it's called Voiceless. Healing place where they slice and stitch, inner rumblings complete with racing mind, as the needle slips in blessed sleep while they cut my throat. And I had forgotten I wrote that, and I thought that was so dramatic. But at the time, when they went in to do that operation, I really was very, very worried about what they'd find. Would I be able to talk again in the same way? I mean, I knew I'd be able to talk again, but would I be able to talk in the same way? So, you know, I think even I hadn't realised how worried I was until I read that poem when I printed it out and thought, oh yeah, you were worried. The other thing that happened to us was we were approached by an art gallery, and they were looking at a different way of selling their poems, selling their paintings. So what they did was they asked the 3 of us to come and choose a painting, and then we had to write a poem about it. And then on the opening, we read our poem to the artist while they were standing there in front of their painting. And for anyone out there who is also a painter or an artist, it's a really lovely thing to do, to put a poem with a painting. And we all really enjoyed the experience. But the painters really enjoyed the experience because, of course, in their painting, they have their own vision. And when I looked at the painting I chose, which was a seascape, I created a story. And she was really interested to know that that whole story came out of her painting when we've both been on such different pages. So would you like to hear that one?
Sure, absolutely.
So we have a place here in Melbourne called Ricketts Point, and I suppose it's like it's a place where people go and climb on rocks. There's a little sailing club, a little cafe. It's a sheltered beach. It's a very, very popular beach. So this is called Ricketts Point. We met at the sailing club. I beat you in a race. You said you didn't mind, but I knew better. A courtship of sandy kisses, salty tears when you left for the war. Just a boy. Lonely afternoons walking the beach, just waiting. You came back a man, different, a stranger, until we went to Ricketts Point. I watched the magic of the sea return you to me. You slipped a ring on my finger. I wore flowers in my hair. You a paisley shirt and flares. This beach holds our story, witnessed our laughs, our tears. Sitting beneath the tea tree, I hear you call across the wind, see your shadow in the rock pools, and I curse the ghost of war. Ricketts Point, my sanctuary, my haven, where our souls meet.
Wow, that is beautiful. You have this great way of drawing us in. I love that idea with the museum to have you, present a poem to a visual artist at actually an art gathering, in front of his or her work. That's a great idea. I'd love for you, Deborah, to get into a bit of your creative process, if you will, and share that with us.
Yes, absolutely. So I think one of the things that is really important to me is I'll get an idea, I'll think, oh, I should write about that. And I never think I'll think about it later. I always have, these days we've got phones, but, I'd always have pen and paper in the car. That divorce poem I wrote in the car at traffic lights because I got the line, divorce is as a pebble dropped in a pond. And I went, oh, that's gold. So I think my inspiration comes from everyday things, everyday moments, small things, focusing on the small things. I get inspired by travel. I get inspired by writing about a place, but I write about it to remember what we did there rather than just describe it. I like to still take that journey, if you like. I think one of the things that we sometimes don't take notice of is the everyday things. When they're recorded in a poem, they are very moving and they mean a lot to people because we're all universally, collectively, we are connected by small things. The beach or the mountains or the bush, whatever it is that where you go that you like. I think though mostly my inspiration is from moments. It's from a moment and I'll think I'm going to write about that and I jot it down straight away. I mightn't have the words, but I jot that idea down straight away.
Mm-hmm. And then when you get to that moment, Deborah, where you're actually in the creative process writing it, then you kind of relive that moment and then you just let it build and let it build and let the scene kind of unravel itself.
Yes, I used to worry a lot that I tended to write a lot in rhyme. And I played around with that. I find it easier to write in rhyme and then I change it to be free verse. I don't know why I do that, but that's just how it is for me. So if I really can't find a word, well, then my mind will go in a different way. I like to write apart, just get my ideas down. Then I might mind map a few different words, particularly if I want it to be free verse and not rhyme. And I would probably do 10 drafts before I'm happy. A lot of times I take words out. I'll just play with the idea of trying to take as many words out, see what that looks like. I'll try it as rhyme, I'll try it as free verse.
So you have a pretty elaborate refinement process once the body of it is, the poem is in.
Yeah, but I like the process. I enjoy the process. So if I get a first line, that's probably the hardest. You want to grab your listener straight away. So I work on that a lot. I like the first line to be meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
Grab your reader or grab your listener.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I might, as I said, I might mind map. I'm going to write about, if I'm going to write about, I'm just sort of looking at my poems here. If I'm going to write about, say, the sea, I will put sea and then I will write all the words associated with the sea or boating or wind or, you know, I like to have all, and then I write opposite words as well. But I enjoy that process.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's part of the fun of it.
Right, absolutely. That's very exciting to be in that. It's so energetic, and it's a fascinating process. And I love to hear poets share their creative process because they're so vast and different. And you know, we all learn from how each other approaches something, and then we have new things that we can take to it. During our process of writing poetry, and be a little bit more innovative and creative with it. Tell us about some current projects that are going on with you now, Deborah.
Okay. Well, I think probably printing out my poems and getting them into order and getting a book up, that's probably one of the things I want to do. I have a website that I don't do anything with, sadly. So I would like to rejig that to make that more about poetry. Like I have one page on there about poetry, but when the website went up, I was looking at maybe doing some editing work, doing other stuff. And I don't want to do that now. Now I just want to write and do poetry, and I'm very lucky I'm retired and I'm fortunate and I can just play. So one of my goals is to get my website up and filled with poetry. I've got lots of poems here that can go up that I can share. I have a Facebook page, Deborah Williams Writes. And again, I've been a little bit slow loading stuff up on there too. I've written a couple of things, but I haven't shared that much. I think, like most writers, we're all frightened of judgment and criticism. And I think there has been, for me, that's what's held me back. But I don't know, now I kind of think, well, so many people put so many things online that you're just part of the collective and just enjoy it. So my three goals are the book, my website and my Facebook page. Enjoying being part of a poetry group again, which I am, and continuing to write moments. Continuing to continue to encourage people to write about their life.
Mm-hmm. Can you shoot out a couple topics of some new poems that you're planning on writing?
Yes, well, I have grandchildren, and I wrote a poem for my granddaughter when she was, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5, and it's called Princess. I sing you Disney songs as we read favoured fairy stories, Sleeping Beauty and Snow White. Someday my prince will come. Happy endings from love's kiss. Such a fraud I am, because I know there's no such thing. Why do I persist in continuing the farce? Why not tell you tales to follow your dream? A princely kiss will not fill your heart. I grew up on the same silly stories, believed in the knight in white, thought I recognised him at just 16. I gave him my love, my life. Older, wiser, I know it's all untrue, yet I look at you and know, if not for fostered fairy tales, I would not have my very own happy ever after. So I wrote that when Heidi was 4 or 5, and she's now 10. So one of the things that I want to do is to write a poem for each year of her life. I realised when I wrote that it captured the moment of how much we enjoyed the Disney fairy tales. And then, I kind of got a bit serious there about, well, love's kiss isn't the answer. But it made me think, it captured a moment of her and I together reading fairy stories. And when she's old enough and she reads that, she will know that's true. But I did create my own happy ever after. We all create our own happy ever after. Mm-hmm. So one of my projects is to write some more specific poems around the grandchildren and my children and my children, because that's such a nice way to honour them.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's so beautiful how you almost like want to make a moment last and last and last. Yes. Poetry, and I think that's such a beautiful idea and concept. That's very heartwarming.
Well, don't you think, there are so many of those small moments that we let go and you don't remember, but if you've written a poem about it, it's captured. Mm-hmm. It's just absolutely captured. And I think that is really important. My second granddaughter went into hospital when she was 6 weeks old. And she was okay. She was fine. But, we had a worrying night and day. And I came home that night and I wrote a poem. And, I guess it was one of those poems that just, spews out of you. It just comes out of you. And I called it the children's ward. So she was 6 weeks old. She was really tiny. And I was in the hospital with my daughter. And I wrote, I cradle you as you cradle her. Our tears a torrent that tumble down pale cheeks. The river of blood that binds us rush through our veins. Yet we are statues in this place where despair hangs in the air like a hangman's noose. Mother, daughter, grandmother, I am all, but here I am none. Helpless to ease the swell of your suffering. Like a wave it builds momentum crashing, only to flow back to the sea to recur. Weighted words finally drop like pebbles in a pond. You can go home. We walk the hospital corridors, holding our baby to our hearts, thankful, humbled, nodding to the women who are left behind, the mothers, the daughters, the grandmothers, fastened by collective grief. They acknowledge us with small smiles, happy in the knowledge we are escaping. We're united in hope. Now, I wrote that the night that Saskia came out of hospital. And I know that she's now 5. We've never really talked about it again. But this is now written as part of her history, that we had that scary day, that scary night. And it was all right. But as I drove home, I thought of, I was cradling you as you were cradling her. And I thought, that's what motherhood's all about. And I wanted that line to be immortalised for Saskia, so that she knows when she grows up, because she doesn't remember, of course, she was only 6 weeks old.
Yeah, you record these moments very beautifully. I have a question for you, Deborah, and tell me if it's correct. I get this sense that you're able to, when you write your poetry and it's about all these, different circumstances, things that are going on, it seems that you're able to almost like get into the head of everybody who is involved. So in other words, it's like you are like the quintessential observer, like you have your own perspective and feeling, but I feel like you also look at it from the other person or people that are involved, their perspective, and you include that. Do you agree with that?
Thank you. Yes, I do agree with that. Thank you so much. I take that as a real compliment. One of the really nice things that happened to me when we travelled to Turkey, and we went to Gallipoli, which is a famous war place for Australia. We lost a lot of soldiers there. And while we were there, there was a man there who had a letter from his great uncle who had been to Gallipoli. And when we all we were on a tour, and when we got on the shore, he handed the letter to me and he said, I don't think I can read this, I'm too emotional. Will you read this letter from my great uncle who wrote it when he was here? So I did that. I read the letter, and it was very moving because this young man died when he was 21. What happened after that was, a year later, we were travelling, and someone asked we have a day called Anzac Day where we honour those soldiers. They asked if anyone had anything they could share. And so I contacted this man and I said, can I read your great uncle's letter out? Because it's so moving. And he said, yes. And he gave me the letter. He said, this letter is yours. You can do with it whatever you want. So I wrote a poem about it. And I wrote a poem about this young man who was a baker and who died in the war. And that poem went on to go into our war museum in our capital of Australia, in Canberra. And it's something that I'm very proud of. And I just think, you never know where poetry is going to take you. But when I stood on the shore of Gallipoli, when I read that letter, when I got to keep the letter, when I eventually wrote the poem, I felt like I knew that man. And that's a privilege, an absolute privilege. And that's what interests me about poetry and sharing people's stories.
Right. Yes. That's an amazing experience. Another thing that I am observing with you as well, Deborah, that I find very interesting skill and ability that you have is you're writing about obviously very moving things, very emotional, and all things that are relatable as well, that most people can relate to, but yet you don't get tangled in the emotionality of it, but yet it's an emotional experience and moment in some of these. And I find that such a fine line, and you seem to have a great refinement with this ability. Do you view that within yourself as well?
No, probably I don't. I probably the word that I keep in my mind when I'm writing is resonate. Will this resonate with someone else? Will someone read a poem about divorce and go, yes, that's exactly what it's like? Will they read a poem about a soldier in Gallipoli and go, yes, all the things that I've read about war, and let's face it, we all know a lot about war from movies and books and things, even though we may not have gone through war, we know a lot about it. So if they read my poem about Sergeant Robert Baker, will something resonate there? Have I put something in the poem that someone will go, yes, I get that, or I understand that, or I've been there? I guess that's something that I do try and do. I think now it doesn't have to resonate with hundreds of people, as long as it touches someone, as long as it touches another person. Well, then I feel like my job's done.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for sharing that, Deborah. We have a few more moments. Is there anything that you'd like to touch upon that we haven't discussed yet? And can you also share with us how we can stay connected with you?
Absolutely. I have a Facebook page called Deborah Williams Writes. So that's pretty easy to remember and to find. And I also have a website, Deborahwilliamswrites.com. And my email is Deborahwilliamswrites@gmail.com. So if anyone wants to contact me, that would be fantastic, and talk things all poetry, because that's what brings us together, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate this. Thank you so much, Deborah.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a delight, and to, hold the floor and read poetry for 25 minutes is pretty exciting for any poet.
Mm-hmm.
I encourage everyone, come and do this interview. It's fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Deborah. Well, we learned a lot from you, and we appreciate what you shared and all about your poetry, and really enjoyed getting to know you and be inspired by all that you're doing. So we thank you. Thank you everybody for watching Poetry and Talk. We're so grateful that you checked us out today, and please stay connected with us on our Facebook page, Poetry and Talk. Thank you again to Deborah Williams. Thank you again, everyone, for watching. Please stay connected with us, and we'll talk soon on the next Poetry and Talk. Until then, be well and be blessed. Thank you, everyone. Thanks again, Deborah.